Welcome to the Support of Ambition, where we celebrate creativity, ambition, and the journey of bringing big ideas to life. I'm your host, Danny, and each week I'll introduce you to inspiring voices from all walks of life. Artists, innovators, and dreamers who are pushing boundaries and redefining what's possible. This podcast is about the power of support, shared stories, and the belief that we're all stronger when we lift each other up. Thanks for joining us on this journey. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone. Today we have the privilege of speaking with Zak Ford, the author of Called Up, Ballplayers Remembering Becoming Major Leaguers. This compelling collection captures the personal stories of over 100 baseball players who have made their major league debuts between 1961 and 2018. Through their narratives, Zak provides us with a window into the dreams, struggles, and triumphs that define the journey to the big leagues. Welcome, Zak, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, Danny. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great. I really enjoy talking baseball. I don't get to do it as much as I would like. So to have you here, and especially to talk about ball players when they become major leaguers, that's such a fascinating concept to me because it's like something that you don't really think about too much. It just happens, right? So to get into the mind of these players and to hear firsthand accounts of what it was like, that must have been kind of thrilling for you.
Absolutely. It was something that, obviously, I think everybody that picks up a baseball glove wants to become a major leaguer at one point in their life.
True.
I quickly realized when I was hitting 200 in Little League, my chances of making the big leagues were pretty slim, right? So I figured I needed to pursue something else. But, in my, I'm 46 now. I started this project about 5 years ago. In my 40s, I was, in a way, able to relive the dream I had as a kid through talking to these ball players.
Yep.
Right. And especially, the stories range from 1961 all the way through 2018. However, admittedly, I was a little bit biased towards those guys in the late 80s, early 90s, when I was a young baseball fan. Because when I was a kid, Major League Baseball players, they weren't human.
Yeah.
They were like godlike superheroes, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're put on, baseball fields to entertain us, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And obviously, as an adult and even really as an older kid, I realize that's far from the truth. But they all reached a goal that all of us had when we were younger. And I really wanted to capture the human side, the human interest side of these stories. So, there are, the stories are going to include some game details, but more than anything else, it's about the trials and tribulations, what it felt like when they got that call, what the orientation process was like,
Right. Right.
What was going through their minds when they ran out to that mound or ran out to that field the first time or stepped in the batter's box the first time as a major leaguer. And the human side of these ball players was what I wanted to capture more than anything else. And I think that, I was able to, do a fairly good job doing that, I believe.
I think you did. I've read through, I think I'm into the end of the 80s now.
Great.
And it's been fascinating hearing or just reading them. And like you said, they are firsthand oral stories that if you hadn't captured these, who else would know about them?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a really important part of, or important topic of why this book is important.
Yeah. And, I wasn't going after really, Hall of Famers or, big name guys that required, agents or publicists. So, I was talking to guys who, for the most part, there are some, fairly regular all-stars in there and stuff. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, these are guys who went on to have, semi-normal lives after baseball who obtained a dream. And it was just really fascinating to be able to talk to these guys and get those stories and, have them share with me those firsthand accounts of, reaching that goal and being able to, take those interviews, organize them into story form, and present them essentially as spoken word. I wanted readers,
Right.
when they're reading
Right.
this,
Mm-hmm.
to kind of read it as if it's being told to them
Right.
directly from the player.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you nailed that and the way you delivered it. So yes, kudos to you for that.
Thanks.
Um, well, with such a vast pool of players, how did you choose from them? Or did you just include everyone that you've interviewed, or was it like, did you pare it down a little bit, or how did that selection come about?
I am going to provide an answer that is not overly exciting. Um, Honestly, my only criteria was that they were on a major league roster at one time.
There you go.
That's it. Right. And to be completely candid, I tended to gravitate to those stories that were, not the number one draft pick that made his second spring training. I like the stories of the guys who may have spent, 6, 7, 10 years in the minor leagues before getting that September call up once,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
I tended to think, I gravitated to those stories because they were able to show a little bit more ups and downs and more of a relatable connection,
Right. Right.
if that makes any sense. So, like I said, my only criteria was that they served on a major league roster and they were willing to chat with me. So you'd be amazed how many players that I actually just found on social media. Probably
Okay.
half to 2/3 of the guys
Mm-hmm.
were, I just did, a search for MLB alum or former major leaguer in Facebook and Twitter, I guess now X.
Yeah.
And a lot of them would have it in their bio. And once you follow a few, become friends with a few, the social media algorithms start, acting up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would just reach out that way. So I really kind of took just kind of a shotgun approach. And whoever was willing to chat with me, I was more than willing to include their story. And I have 109 in the book.
That's awesome. You cast a wide net. Yes.
Yes.
And prove the good part of social media.
Yes. Yes. It gets wild out there sometimes, but this is a baseball focus. Yeah.
Were there any interviews that particularly resonated with you or surprised you during the process?
There was, actually one. I'm a Giants fan, admittedly. So there probably are a few more Giants, especially in the era that I follow, just because I tended to be more familiar with their names.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I was just thinking of his story today because I saw that it was his birthday on social media. The Giants sent it out. Sean Estes. So Sean Estes
I remember him.
Is now he does pre and post game. He does occasional play-by-play stuff like that for the Giants. Mm-hmm. And he was one of the guys that was, willing to chat with me. And I had obviously remembered him from when I wasn't young when he got called up. I was a teenager. But he was, I think, 22 or 23 at the time that he got called up. So he was relatively young. And I didn't know this part of his story until I was talking to him. But he didn't make it out of A-ball until his 5th professional season.
Oh, wow.
I mean, he was a number one pick, so you get a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more leniency when you're a number one pick. But he was a number one pick by the Mariners and spent literally 5 years in A-ball.
Wow. Okay.
And that almost never happens. Typically, like you get maybe 2.5, and you're gone. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're not going to. But, like I said, he's the number one pick. They give him a little bit more lead. So he gets traded to the Giants in 1995. That's when the Mariners were having those challenges, and they really needed to get a new ballpark. They needed to try and win at a major league level quickly. They made a trade with the Giants. and then they had that run towards the end of that season. Well, he gets traded over to the Giants, and he goes all the way from starting the year in A ball in the Mariner system to being a call up in
Wow.
September with the Giants.
Okay.
I
Hmm.
mean, to go through all those trials and tribulations, even as a number one pick, that's still got to be a challenge.
Yeah.
Because he
Yeah.
told me, he says, you know what? When you're a number one pick, you don't go through a lot of, trials and tribulations, on your way to getting that number one,
Hmm.
being that number one pick, right?
Hmm.
You usually dominate little
Yeah.
league, high
Hmm.
school,
Hmm.
college, blah, 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 right? But then all of a sudden you're sent out, to a professional team where almost or the vast majority of the guys were guys who succeeded everywhere they went.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
so there's a transition too mentally of adjusting to that. And he said that there was, definitely a humbling experience for him that he had to process not just physically, but mentally
Hmm.
along that journey and along that pathway. And it took him a little bit of, a time to do so. But yet, luckily, he was relatively young. He wasn't a college pick. I believe he was a high school pick. So
Okay.
he was still 22, 23 years old. But looking at that on the surface, I go, okay, well, that's still pretty young to make your major league
Yeah.
debut.
It is.
But if you put 5 years in A ball,
Yeah.
that's that can be humbling.
I can imagine. I mean, you're number one pick, so you have not only the expectations of the club that drafted you, but your own
Yeah.
expectations of yourself, and to be
Mm-hmm.
humbled 5 years, and then all those, I'm sure, moments of self-doubt come in,
Mm-hmm.
and then to finally get the call up and to have that emotional roller coaster go there. Yeah, I'm
Yeah, I
gonna
mean,
get to his
there's
story
there's
soon.
guys like that were number one picks that got kind of humbled. There's guys that number one picks, truthfully, that got their second spring training. They got the
Mm-hmm.
call, and then I also got guys in there that were undrafted free agents out of independent ball
Okay.
who, you know, had ups and downs even in independent ball, and then eventually made the major leagues. So there's quite a diverse amount of stories in this book.
Absolutely. Among those stories, did you find any like recurring themes or emotions that stood out in the player stories?
One of the things that was really interesting to me, and I kind of alluded to it a little bit in the Sean Estes story, is the mental side of the game.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, a lot of us have probably seen that, especially for pitchers.
Yeah.
Some of us may have seen that Kevin Costner movie For Love of the Game,
Mm-hmm.
and he's in the middle of pitching that perfect game, and he says clear the mechanism, where he's basically so focused and so locked in that he just blocks out the crowd, blocks out everything else. And there was I knew a few ball players when I was younger, and they told me they would do that, and I was like, ah, oh, that's a bunch of hooey. Like that, they're just there's no way anybody is mentally that strong to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But that was something that was fairly common, that you say, hey, I have to be locked in, I got to focus. I just try and block out the crowd, I can't hear them. And I thought, wow, like how, like I don't know how you can get that locked in.
Yeah.
But when literally when your livelihood depends on it, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so.
I guess you're able to cross that threshold. I know that I would never was, even when I was, struggling in little league. But obviously, struggling in little league is infinitely different than struggling in the major leagues.
Yeah. Well, maybe. I mean, it's still, well, Little League isn't 90 feet, but, still
Yeah.
same. Bases are the same side. Home plate is 18 inches. I heard there's that one coach that says, or umpire, or someone said, like, how wide is home plate at Little League? How wide is it in high school? How wide is it in
Mhm.
college? It's all the same. So, yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I noticed among the stories, though, was that it seemed to be a whirlwind from when a player got the call to when ended up in his debut in the majors. Well, for most of them, some there was a
Mhm.
delay, but that's something I noticed a lot about among many of the players was that it was get the call. Next thing you know, you're on the field. Did you?
Oh yeah.
Did they players seem excited when they when they talked about that, or was it more of like a anxiety, remember, like PTSD, remembering anxiety from that moment?
I mean, it was definitely a positive experience.
Yeah,
I
true.
mean, it was, but it was a lot of them did reference, that just like that anxious, that that nervousness of
Hmm.
wanting to get into a game, but also being self conscious of, okay, well, shoot, now the lights are on me. I need to be super focused. I need to make sure that I do my job.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
true. Hmm.
but some of these guys, they got called up. They reach they get you know they don't sleep all night long after they're told, after a night game in the minor leagues. They
Yeah.
take an early morning flight cross
Hmm.
country to show up for a day game, only to find their names are on the lineup card, and then they have to find out what they're made of,
Yeah,
right?
that's true.
Um, and a lot of them, admittedly said, like maybe at the time, they were just like, oh my gosh, you got to be kidding me. But really, I think that that's in a lot of cases that was actually probably better for them because they were able to get over that
Yeah.
nervousness,
Hmm.
as opposed to, there
Sitting
are
in it.
plenty of guys too that sat on the bench for a
Hmm.
week or two before getting that debut, and they're able to, they end up overthinking it.
Yeah.
So really kind of varies, but there were quite a guys that just got thrown into the fire almost immediately.
Yep. How did all the stories that you were told, how did that affect your perspective on the game of baseball and the players who pursue it?
Yeah, I had a great uncle that used to play professional baseball in the
Okay.
30s through 50s, and I spent a lot of my teenage years and young adult years, going to his reunions and interacting with his former teammates and opponents. So I had a little bit of an understanding, but obviously, when you're talking about, two or three generations removed,
Hmm.
you don't really have the same connection, right?
Right.
And I had referenced earlier about, talking to some of the ball players, from, just my experience being a young baseball fan in the, late 80s and early 90s, and being able to communicate with them. And, I still, trade text messages with them often,
Oh,
regularly,
fun.
or Facebook messages or whatnot. But to be able to kind of connect with them, not just as ball players, but as human beings, and kind of understand that there's a human element
Hmm.
in this, in this process as well. It is still a job. It's still a dream. But, to be able to capture, you know, the human side of what it felt like
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
cross that threshold
Yeah.
was something that I'm very pleased that I was able to do. I did have, like I said, I had a little bit of an understanding just based on the interactions I had with my great uncle, but it definitely hit home a little bit more when I was talking to ball players that I actually remember,
Oh, yeah.
collecting
Yeah.
baseball cards
Hmm.
of. So that was definitely a cool experience.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. Yeah. Now, I guess more about you personally. Did you know you wanted to be a writer at some point in your life, or did that just you just happen to fall into that?
Well, as I had referenced earlier, I was a horrible baseball player. I probably hit, when all was said and done, I may have broke 200 in little league.
Hey, you're above Mendoza
Um,
line. You're fine.
yeah, so I realized as a young teen that I wasn't going to be making the major leagues. I wasn't even. I didn't even make the high school team. So um, I did want to do something in baseball,
Okay.
and I wanted to get into writing. And then when I started college in the mid '90s, and
Okay.
at the time, I could kind of see the writing on the wall regarding the internet, and
Mm,
which was
yeah.
relatively new at the time too. But I
True.
kind of
Hmm.
realized, I was like, well, this is going to impact the number of sports writers that are available.
True.
There's not going to be a need for all these local papers to have different sports. So I kind of put a pause on it, I also realized that it's going to pay horrible and it's not going to be family friendly. So I sold out. I majored in business. And then in around the time I was, about maybe 39, 40, when my kids were a little bit older, I was a little bit more established. I wanted to at least get back into it as a hobbyist.
Yeah.
And I don't have any aspirations of making this, a career. I want this to, I mean, it would be great, but I realistically, I'm thinking of this as just something that, fulfills me and is, a hobby that hopefully one day I could at least break even on. And, I think we all see these, virtual videos every year of guys calling their mom after, a decade in the minor leagues.
Yeah.
And,
I know what you mean.
something like that goes around social media. And I wanted to get something that, and I've always gravitated towards the human interest side of baseball. And was like, well, where can I find my niche per se?
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking, okay, well, it's kind of cool. The human interest side of, getting the call, making your debut is something that's, has a fairly broad interest, even if you're not a baseball fan. It's just
it's
attaining
human
goals.
interest. Yeah.
And, I just kind of thought about, okay, well, what could I do that could, capture a wide audience, still be related, to baseball, and also obviously be of interest to me.
Mm-hmm.
And called up, major league call ups and debuts was something I ultimately decided to pursue for the first book.
There you go. So how has the reception been among readers of the book?
For the vast majority of them, folks have really appreciated it and liked it. It's not a moneymaker. I mean,
It's a passion.
and I did not anticipate that this would be a moneymaker. I mean, I half joked during the process that my goal was to get a book published. I had always wanted to get a book published.
Mm-hmm.
I half joked that my goal was to get this book published without losing $10,000. And I was able to obtain that lofty goal.
There you go.
When all was said and done, I think I probably spent about $8,000. And this was, transcriptions, services,
Right.
Promoting it, complimentary copies, etc. I've recouped about half of that. But more than anything else, it's just a labor of love. And I was able to find something that was of interest to me that I think that other, readers can appreciate as well. And I'm just like, most of the people reading this, I'm just a baseball nerd that likes the stories. I'm not, some hoity toity,
I got you.
sports, yeah.
Yeah, you're a fan of the game, and that's where your passion comes from.
Yeah.
And that is seen through, I think, with the care that you put to tell these players' stories. So, absolutely. I think I saw somewhere online where you mentioned that maybe your follow-up book or your next book could be maybe about post-playing careers and transitions. What can you tell me about that? Is that something that you can share a little bit about,
Yeah,
or?
absolutely. So, I've always been interested, and I keep going back to this, is, ball players as human beings. I mean,
Yeah.
that's which they are. I mean, it's, and the average fan doesn't understand that the vast majority of people, even if they make the major leagues, they're not retiring off major league.
Right, that's true.
They're like, if you spend, maybe if you do nowadays, but 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago,
Nope.
if you spent 10 years in the minor leagues up and down, you had parts of 2 or 3 years in the major leagues, like you're having to get a job probably your first year out of baseball.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't realize that. And but you still had that moment in your life where you had attained something that all of us, dreamed about.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a transition and sometimes, you know, it's easy for some to realize. Sometimes it takes, you know, a decade. Sometimes, I mean, I've talked to ball players that are 20, 25 years removed
Hmm.
who, you know, have told me, you know, maybe if I had to do it all over again, I may not have chose baseball.
Oh, interesting.
Um, because it was just so hard for them to go through that transition.
Hmm.
So, you know, it's about, you know, when they kind of realized the writing was on the wall,
Hmm.
that their days were numbered. And keep in mind, if you play baseball until you're realistically even 30, you had a fairly long baseball career on average, right? So
Right.
you
True. True.
have
Hmm.
50 years after, you have, you know, 30, 35 years of work after that, most likely.
Yeah.
Um, so, you know, I luckily have become friends with a lot of the players that were in Called Up. So there will be a lot of the players that were in Called Up will be in Next Up, which will be on the post-playing
Cool.
career transition. So I was able to establish those relationships and those
Yeah.
friendships with those players to where they're able to open up a little bit more with me and be more candid about the challenges they had during that transition.
Mm.
So, you know, some of them, it may have taken, you know, 2, 3, 4 different careers before they found their, you know, their next purpose
Yeah.
after baseball. You know,
Yeah.
some folks, you know, went into business and had, you know, fairly substantial success. When they sold their businesses, they decided to become youth coaches because they still had that itch.
Mm.
There's really a broad array of players that will be in the book. But it was pretty interesting too. I mean, a lot of them did have success in business after their baseball careers because, you know, some of them told me is like, look, I was used to failing at least 7 out of 10 times.
That's true.
I,
Yep.
I'm not going to fail that much going into business. So like I can accept the failure and the ups and downs of weathering the process as I grow a business because I did that as a ball player for a half dozen 10 years working my way up to the major leagues. So they
Right.
kind of had that different mentality uh which helped them succeed in the business world.
That's really cool. That's very true. I mean, failing 7 out of 10 times mean you're getting paid nowadays, what, 12 million a year. So
Yeah, you could fail if you could hit bombs, you could fail almost 8 out of 10 times
there you
now.
go.
There are some guys making some bank at hitting 220.
I know a
If they're
leadoff hitter
hitting
that does
30
that, right?
home runs, 40 home runs, that's not the necessarily the type of. I like the 80s and 90s baseball where guys were trying to hit 300, stealing bases, bunting, and scoring
I,
manufactured runs. But
I,
I'm a little bit old school like that.
no, I tend to agree with you that the 85 Cardinals, Vince
Oh yeah,
Coleman,
that's
yeah,
exciting.
that type of run game with just, and I think it's coming back a little bit. We
Yeah.
see players now are putting more emphasis on the run game, especially with the whole, stepping off and limit and whatnot, throwing over limit. So hopefully
Mm-hmm.
that comes back more where we see more athletic play as opposed to everyone aiming for the stands each and every time. But
Mm-hmm.
we'll see.
Yeah.
Well, one last question for you, not related to the book, but still related to baseball in a way. Um, Top three favorite baseball movies.
Top three favorite baseball movies. Gosh. Um, in no particular order, because if you were to ask me after I watched one, I would
I got you.
probably, it would rotate, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Um, I'd probably go Field of Dreams,
Okay.
A League of Their Own, and The
Nice.
Sandlot.
You're killing me, Smalls.
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Those are great. Those are great. Well, Zach, if people wanted to follow you or find out more info about your book, where would it be the best place for them to go?
They can find me on social media, just Zak Ford, Called Ups, Next Up. They just have to spell Zach weird. My parents decided to spell Zach Z-A-K. So if they spell it the way 95% of other people spell it, they're not going to find me. ZakFord. They could also go to ZakFord.com too.
There you go,
ZakFord.com.
ZakFord.com.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Zak, thank you so much for spending some time with me, chatting about your book, chatting about baseball. I really appreciate it here. And I look forward to hearing more about your next project when it does come out and you do get that. And I want other people to find it because I think these stories are fascinating. And I thank you personally for compiling them for us.
Well, I appreciate you having me on, and I'd definitely be happy to talk about the next project once it's complete.
Awesome. Thank you again, Zak.
Appreciate it. Thanks again.